happened in the past. These are memories and we can't change them no matter what. Or anxiety comes from worrying about the future, about things that haven't happened yet and may never happen. And so we find ourselves getting wound up and over-preparing or just having a hard time not dreading this. But the simple fact of the matter is we live in the present. So the past and the future, though it can affect us emotionally, can't affect us physically, and we can't really do anything to alter those two sources. So that's really kind of what mindfulness is all about, bringing things into the present and reminding yourself, look, right here, right now, things aren't so bad. Yes, it's good to plan, it's good to prepare, but we don't have to overdo it. And being mindful about the things in your life that are important, your family, your work, your own well-being, focusing on those right here, right now, and asking yourself, what can I do right now to attend to these things? And if you're the kind of person who feels really anxious, has a hard time catching your breath, you find yourself taking shallow, deep breaths, or you're having a hard time falling asleep, one, close your eyes, block out everything out there. Take controlled breathing, deep breaths. Anxiety is linked to short, shallow breathing or hyperventilation, because anxiety is all about getting energy into our bloodstream so we can fight off threats. So by kind of short-circuiting that reflex and taking long, controlled breaths can actually calm you down. But if the emotion starts to get overwhelming and you're losing sleep, you're having a hard time calming down, you're having a hard time relating to other people, you're snapping at them, you just don't really seem on your A game, allow yourself time to step back. All of that is emotion. All of that is normal. All of that is okay and valid. But if it's overwhelming you and feels too big to manage, the trick is step back, give yourself a timeout, and ask yourself, very, very cerebrally, very intellectually, what is the evidence that things are this bad? What is the evidence that I should be this worried or this wound up? And actually be honest with yourself. And maybe what you'll find is, okay, things aren't so bad. Yes, they're an area of concern. Yes, I should be worried about my personal protection or my child's well-being or my spouse's well-being. But I can do those things and they don't warrant this level of anxiety. And maybe that intellectualizing what's going on will give you the ability to manage the stress so it isn't quite so bad. But certainly if stress is getting to the point where you can't sleep, no matter what you do, and you're losing weight or gaining weight in a way that you hadn't predicted, or if you just can't calm yourself down, or you're shaking, or you're having panic attacks, it may be time, if it's interfering with your life, to reach out to someone and talk about, hey, I need help. And then maybe either through talk therapy like I provide, or medicinal therapy like your primary care physician or psychologist could provide.
Yeah, those are good points. I think a lot of times we might be reluctant to seek help for those types of issues where we should, sometimes, at least in certain mindsets, you've got to just tough our way through this and we just got to get over it. But I think having the resources, knowing that there's somebody there to talk to and knowing when to recognize when it's at that point can be very helpful. Now, another thing that we're kind of experiencing nationwide is more and more isolation. I've always felt that obviously we're social creatures, but can you talk about some of the ways that isolation impacts our well-being, and then maybe if there's some underreported strategies to kind of combat that isolation?
Isolation is killer on pretty much every front. And one of the things that Dr. McIntosh, the director of the wellness program, and I have talked about is we've talked about social distancing. It's really not social distancing, it's physical distancing. We should have a good space between us or not spreading the disease, but we should not disconnect from other people, because our number one best strategy for managing anxiety, for managing depression, for managing most psychological problems is other people, having those resources. And when we disconnect from that, we are taking the best and easiest access point for wellness out of the picture. In fact, we were just talking about aging pets. When a pet, for those of you who have pets, when a pet gets old and gets sick and it's reaching the end of its life, what does it do? It goes off and tends to be by itself. It might hide under the bed or hide behind the couch. And why does it do that? It does that to go and die alone. And when we disconnect from other people and other resources, what we're basically communicating to our mind is, I'm sick, I need to be alone because I don't got this and I'm not safe. And by staying connected to other people, we're really getting rid of that reflexive emotional response. So how do we do that in a world of a pandemic when we are social distancing in addition to physical distancing? Well, all kinds of interesting research has come out of this particular pandemic. First and foremost, the whole world is about Zoom right now, right? We're using Zoom here. Zoom has allowed us to interact with family members, with professionals, with friends, with our clergy, with just everything in a way that's still social, but safe. Is it the same thing as physical interaction in person? No, but it's a decent approximation, and it's better than nothing. What we've also found for your kids, gaming, those social gaming systems that we plug into online, excellent way of interacting with other people, even if it's in a virtual format. Even if it's not you, it's a character that you're controlling, it's still a way of kind of communicating to yourself psychologically. I'm not alone. There are other people around me, and we're part of a community here. So finding ways to do that, talking on the phone, talking to your neighbor across the fence, doing those kind of things, but it's imperative not to isolate. Isolation leads to all kinds of bad outcomes.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I've seen that before. Just important. We need to look at new ways to remain connected, and even if you might not be a phone person and more of a text person, just a phone call can really change what the other person is experiencing, because we're all dealing with a variety of emotions. I think probably one of the most common emotions right now, especially where we are in a healthcare setting, is that of the caregiver. So we have a lot of frontline caregivers who are trying to balance the health and well-being of their own family, trying to protect them and keep them safe from the coronavirus, along with their own duties. So what is your advice? I'm sure you've had several conversations with some of those individuals. What is some of the pieces of advice you share for those people who are kind of towing that line to, well, I need to keep my family safe, and if I'm isolated from my family, that's not that great either, but I also have a job to do as a caregiver. How do you help those individuals walk that path?
Yeah, and your question is specific about caregivers or medical caregivers, but it's actually much bigger than that now that everyone seems to be going to work. So people working in hair salons or people working in grocery stores or restaurants are facing the exact same kinds of issues that those of us that had to come to work every day through this pandemic faced as well. So this is bigger than just us now. And we are approaching a new normal, whatever that's going to be. And we are getting back into our roles pre-pandemic, going back to work. And there's a couple of issues that brings up. And all of it has to do with anxiety of, is it safe? Are we ready to do this? And we're getting conflicting information out there about whether it is safe. Certainly there's become a political football of, are the numbers we're getting being depressed, or are they being exaggerated? Is it really true that the virus is on the run? Will we have a second wave? What is that going to look like? And a couple of tips that have come out recently in the literature, I just want to share with everybody. First and foremost is you need to remember you're not alone in this, that we are all facing these questions and these concerns together. And this isn't something you necessarily have to come up with a plan on your own. This is where we were just talking about social isolation is so much of a problem, because we really should have other people that we can talk about this. But I can go to John and say, John, do you feel safe about going over to the clinical center today? Do you have a mask? Do we need a mask? Is a mask required? What will a mask do? And we can talk about it, and there's comfort in the discussion. Two, got to remember that you don't need to be perfect through this whole thing, which essentially means we're going to make mistakes with it. How do I know that? Because nobody living has gone through a pandemic like this before. This is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing, and we don't have great answers for it, which means as we try to decide what's best for us and best for the people in our lives, we're going to make mistakes from time to time, and that's okay. What's important here is trying to do right, and sometimes realizing that we're going to come up short. Third, accept that that reality is the norm now. And essentially what that means is we are all pining for the days last year when we were able to go to music concerts, we were able to go to church, we were able to go to movies, we were able to go to restaurants, and not to have to worry about whether or not they're open for business because of the pandemic. We have to wear a mask. Will there be appropriate distancing going on? Okay, those days aren't coming back anytime soon. The new reality is we have to deal with the pandemic, we have to deal with the virus, and we have to be mindful everyone else is dealing with that too. And we need to come up with some sort of acceptance of that we have a different way of living now than it was before. Yes, we wanted to get back to the way it was before. Yes, we might get there someday, but it's going to be a long path to get there. Next is talk to your family. You mentioned about wanting to keep your family safe when you come to the hospital, because God forbid we come here, we pick up something and we bring it back home and then infect our families. This is something I worry about on a daily basis. I know you do too, and I'm sure everybody watching does. And so they should be part of the conversation. Basically talk to your children and say, look, this is what I'm doing to keep you safe. When I get home, I'm disrobing in the garage, I'm putting on a robe, and I'm going right into the shower to wash off. And here's why I do it, to keep you safe, so you don't need to worry when you're around me. Talk to your spouse or your boyfriend or girlfriend and say, what can I do to help you feel safe when I get home? They can share their concerns with you, and then you can talk about them, whether they're reasonable or if things are getting overblown. Next, incorporate laughter into your daily routine. As difficult as the pandemic is, it doesn't mean that we're no longer human and that life doesn't go on. Instead, what we need to do is develop a sense of humor to cope with some of the things that are happening. The guy sitting to my left here does stand-up comedy. I know this is something you would recommend as well. When you're laughing, you're doing all kinds of good things internally. You're releasing endorphins. It's cardiovascular in nature. It helps you feel good about yourself and about what's going on. And it also communicates to other people, no danger here. And so it kind of brings people closer together, and it helps you feel better. And lastly, don't give up hope. We need to stay hopeful that things are going to get better. The number of cases in America are going down. The number of deaths in America are going down. Hopefully they'll continue to go down. Hopefully we'll get a vaccine. Hopefully we'll continue to learn more about this virus, and that we'll be able to get it on the run, and we can get back to normal, whatever normal is going to look like. When we give up hope, we open the door to things like depression and despair and grief and things like that. So it's important to remind yourself, today is better than yesterday was, and tomorrow's going to be better than today is.
Yeah, that's a fantastic outlook. And yes, I do. I'm a firm believer that humor is very therapeutic, but I think we all each have different outlets that we can seek out to help us deal with what's going on, whether it's exercise, whether it's taking a warm bath, whether it's listening to a comedy, whatever it might be. Activating that resource on a consistent basis is very important. It can be very therapeutic. And just to remind you guys, if there's things that are on your mind right now, we've got an expert here that can help you navigate some of these emotions that you might be feeling. And I think the one overarching message in all of this that Dr. Chesire just says, that you're not alone. We are all in this together. So if there's anything on your mind you want to ask right now, don't be afraid to type it in. I know there's one other thing that this might just be me. I don't know if anyone else has experienced this too, but I know when the news of the shutdowns first came out and they were canceling all or postponing all sports. I'm a big baseball fan, and all these things we were no longer going to be able to do and go anywhere. And I was like, well, I guess this would be a good time to, maybe try to learn how to play guitar. There was all these online courses that I wanted to take, and there was these new books come out that I wanted to read, but here we are like 2 months later. I really haven't done 90% of what I thought in my mind I was going to do. And I feel like the motivation is just not where I thought it should be, given the opportunity to do some of these other things. Is that something that you notice for other folks?
Starting with the first part of what you said, what a great time to be able to do some of those projects that we always meant to get to but haven't gotten around to, because so much else in the world is shut down. It gives us time. And so if you can, one of the things we talked about is practicing being grateful. And so making sure that you reach out to people and thank them for things in your life that you put off, and kind of reconnect us to people from our past. And what a great excuse to basically reach out to that friend from high school you haven't talked to in 20 years and say, hey, dude, I was thinking about you. Just wondering how you are dealing with things up in Chicago. Down here in Florida, they open the beaches. Not sure what to think about that. What a great way to start a conversation and to reconnect. But the last bit you were talking about I have all of these grand plans, and I've been wanting to do this, and it's always been a priority for me. Now I have the time, but I haven't followed through with it. What's that all about? And one thing that we know for sure, whenever you're exposed to prolonged stress, prolonged anxiety, like wartime, and in a lot of ways the pandemic is a wartime for us. And for those of you old enough, think back to 9/11 and going through that and worrying about terrorism and dealing with the towers coming down and the constant exposure to that. You can only exert that much energy to being anxious for so long. Our bodies just don't carry enough energy in them to be constantly anxious and constantly on guard and constantly ready for danger. And so after several weeks or months, anxiety gives way to fatigue. And fatigue, which is an element of depression, it could actually turn into depression over time. But what that fatigue is basically doing is it's sapping our motivation to do anything. So if you're like me, you put in your shift at work, you get home, last thing in the world you want to do is anything. If you're a resident, you probably need to be studying for your test. Probably not spending a lot of time studying because you just don't have the energy for it. Or if you're faculty, you may be wanting to write a paper or do some research or read another article, probably having a really hard time working on that. Or whatever it is that's important to you, either professionally or personally, knowing you should do it, knowing you want to do it, but just not having the motivation to carry it through. Totally normal. It doesn't make it good, doesn't make it bad. It just means that energy that you're putting forth, worrying about your family, worrying about your friends, worrying about yourself, worrying about work, worrying about finances, worrying about housing projects, worrying about everything. That's where it went, and it's not there to learn how to play the guitar. It may not be there to read another book or to watch a movie. Chances are you just find yourself sitting down on the couch, and also before you know it, 2 hours have gone by and you're ready for bed. It's normal, it's important, it's giving yourself a chance to recharge and reset. If you can find the motivation to do those things, great, they're important too. But if you can't, you shouldn't beat yourself up over it. It's totally normal right now to lack that motivation to go out and do the things that you would have liked to have done.
Yeah, that's good to know because like you feel like, well, I have all this time now, but then all of a sudden I think that's very real because that motivation does diminish the more fatigued you are. So you're right, I get home and we have a toddler, so caring for the toddler and all this, the fatigue is kind of accentuated during this prolonged pandemic. So this is good bits of information. Any last second questions you might have on your mind before we wrap it up? I know one of the things that's going to stick with me is just remembering that we're not alone. And if you can, phone a friend, phone a family member, check in on them. It's going to be good for both of you, the person on the other end of that phone, as well as you yourself, lending that support, lending that helping hand. And remember, right here on campus, we have resources to support you through the Champ Center, through our EAP provider. We want to help you get through this. We're all in this together, and we want to make sure that we always have hope at the forefront. Are there any other closing thoughts you had on what to do?
I think it's important to remember that the pandemic came, but that didn't suddenly say everything before the pandemic, all the worries, all the anxieties, all the duties, all the responsibilities suddenly didn't exist. Pandemic was on top of that. And so realizing that all the stuff we were coping with then too was only compounded by the pandemic. And again, cut yourself slack, give yourself time to feel good. And I think we've got another question that just came in.
Yeah, looks like.
Right.
So the question coming in is, can introversion create somewhat of a heightened sense of anxiousness now in this pandemic? I mean, I guess if you're introverted, can that make you even more anxious during this time?
I'm not sure about introvert. It's a good question. And being introverted basically means you don't like to be the one in the spotlight generally, and you don't want all the energy of kind of the attention of people. And so you'd rather let someone else have the attention to kind of slip outside of that. Doesn't necessarily mean that you don't like to be connected or that you don't like other people, but introverts tend to do best when they're in a small group of people, usually people that they're close to. And so I think, I haven't really thought about this to be honest with you, but it wouldn't surprise me if people who are naturally introverted, who are finding themselves on Zoom meetings or things with lots and lots of people, feel more anxious about exposing what they're concerned about than an extrovert might do. And so introverts might be more likely to crawl inside of themselves and socially distance a bit more or socially isolate a bit more. But I think introverts still prefer to have a really tight-knit group of people that they can connect to. And so whether you're an extrovert that likes to connect to 100 different people at a time, or if you're an introvert that needs that in-depth 4-person group that they can share with what they're going on, I don't know that either one is going to feel more anxious than the other. But I will say, if you're out of your element, if you take an extrovert and now you've only got 2 people that they can talk to, or you're an introvert and suddenly you have to do talks to 20 or 40 different people, then they'll naturally be more anxious.
Yeah, I can see that. And one thing, like anecdotally, we talked about Zoom being at the forefront now. I've noticed just myself when I'm in Zoom meetings where there's more cameras that are on the people versus like no camera on at all, I feel a little bit more connected. Have you noticed that too? Or
Yeah, I do.
it's just, I don't know, it feels like, oh, okay, so there's someone there. So we have, let's see, last thought coming in here. All right, yeah, so very good. Our teacher brings up a good point. It's helpful to know that you're not alone. It's important. I think that's the overarching theme there. So again, just to close out, I want to thank Dr. Chesire for your time, lending us your expertise as director of the CHAMP Center. Also, for those of you that are on the Gator Care program or participating in our wellness credit, just like before, be sure to email to us your name and badge number, and then we'll give you 10 points towards your wellness credit. And then, as a quick plug for tomorrow, Dr. McIntosh and I will be discussing some of the hot topics in nutrition. So we'll kind of shift focus away from the overall pandemic, but to talk about some of the other controversies that exist in the world of nutrition. And hopefully you and I can have some fun with that too. So again, thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.